The massive crystal dome of the Galactic Council chamber sparkled under the light of 3 suns. Inside, representatives from 15 spacefaring civilizations sat in rising tiers of seats, their forms varying from towering insectoids to floating clouds of sentient gas. Among them stood a single human, James Miller, looking small and unremarkable in his black suit. "You send one. Just one negotiator." The booming voice of Council Leader Rex rumbled through the chamber. His scaled face twisted into what passed for amusement among his kind. Even the Mist People sent a delegation of 12. Miller stood calmly at the center of the chamber, his hands clasped behind his back. He had expected this reaction. Earth was new to interstellar travel, having achieved faster-than-light capabilities just 5 years ago. To these ancient civilizations, humans were barely more than clever apes. "One is all we need," Miller replied, his voice steady and clear. The chamber erupted in various forms of laughter, clicking mandibles, rumbling growls, and high-pitched whistles. From his position, Miller watched each reaction carefully. The blue giants of Sector 7 were laughing the loudest, but their third arm, the one they used for combat, remained tense. The crystalline beings from the outer rim weren't laughing at all, instead studying him with their faceted eyes. Information worth noting. Council Leader Rex raised all 4 of his hands for silence. "Very well. Earth's representative, state your case for Council membership." Miller took a small step forward. "Earth seeks neither special treatment nor immediate full membership. We come to learn, to trade, and to understand our place in the galaxy." More laughter followed, but softer this time. Miller noticed how the gas-form beings near the top tier swirled faster, their way of showing interest. The insectoid representatives clicked their mandibles in what he knew was private communication. "Learn, trade." The tall, silver-skinned being named Lord Bright stepped forward. "What could Earth possibly offer? Your technology is centuries behind ours. Your military might is laughable. You haven't even colonized your own solar system properly." Miller allowed a small smile to cross his face. "Perhaps, but Earth has other resources. Knowledge, cultural artifacts, unique biological compounds. We seek peaceful commerce, nothing more." The council members exchanged glances. Miller cataloged each reaction, each subtle shift in posture or color. The floating gas beings had turned a slight shade of green. Curiosity, if his briefings were correct. The crystalline beings had angled their bodies toward him, their facets catching more light. "You will be granted observer status," Rex announced finally. "Nothing more. You may attend open sessions but may not participate. That is our final decision." Miller bowed slightly. "Earth thanks the Council for this opportunity." As he turned to leave, he heard the whispers and clicks of private conversations starting up. They thought him deaf to their words, blind to their secret gestures. They didn't know that human intelligence services had spent years studying each species, learning their hidden languages, their subtle signs. Lord Bright's voice carried clearly. "The human will be gone within a month." These primitive species never last long in galactic politics. Miller kept walking, his face neutral. They didn't notice how his eyes moved, capturing every detail of the chamber's layout. They didn't see him noting which species sat together, which kept their distance. They had no idea that every laugh, every dismissive gesture, every private joke was being recorded in his perfect memory. In his quarters that evening, Miller sat at his desk and began writing his first report to Earth. His fingers moved quickly across the holographic keyboard. Council is exactly as predicted. Arrogant, divided, vulnerable. The stronger species openly exploit the weaker ones, maintaining power through fear and protection agreements. At least 7 smaller civilizations show signs of significant discontent. Beginning phase 1 of our approach. They see us as primitive, which is perfect. Their underestimation of humanity will be their greatest mistake. He paused, looking out at the glittering expanse of the galactic capital's nightscape. Somewhere out there, Earth's careful plans were already in motion. The council's laughter would fade soon enough. Miller smiled and continued typing. 3 months into his role as Earth's observer, Miller had perfected the art of being invisible. He sat quietly in council sessions, appearing to doze off occasionally, while the powerful species debated galactic matters. They barely noticed him anymore, just another primitive being trying to understand their grand civilization. But Miller was far from sleeping. His enhanced memory captured every detail, every subtle interaction. Today, he watched as the blue giants threatened to reduce protection for a smaller civilization unless they increased their crystal exports. The victim species, plant-like beings called the root people, trembled their leaves in submission. During breaks between sessions, Miller walked the great halls of the council building. He had learned that the best information came during these informal moments. The powerful species talked freely around him, assuming he couldn't understand their various forms of communication. "These root people are becoming difficult," Lord Bright said to a fellow council member, their silver skin gleaming. "Perhaps we should remind them of the asteroid field near their homeworld. Accidents do happen." Miller kept his face blank as he pretended to study a historical display nearby. His implants recorded everything, translating multiple alien languages simultaneously. In the garden area, where many species went to rest, Miller observed the gas-form beings clustering together, their colors shifting in agitation. His enhanced hearing picked up their whispered complaints about trade routes being controlled by the larger powers. More information, more pieces of the puzzle. One day, a small root person approached Miller as he sat alone in the dining hall. The being's leaves quivered with nervousness. You always watch, always listen," it said in broken standard language. Miller smiled gently. Sometimes those who are ignored see the most. The root person's leaves stilled for a moment. "We see too. We all see, but we cannot speak." "Perhaps," Miller replied carefully, "you just need someone to listen." That conversation marked a turning point. Over the next few weeks, representatives from smaller civilizations began finding reasons to be near Miller, never directly speaking to him, that would draw attention, but close enough to whisper their grievances. Miller learned of secret treaties forced upon weaker species, of resources stolen through protective tariffs, of military threats disguised as diplomatic concerns. Each piece of information was carefully stored and analyzed. In his secure quarters each night, Miller compiled his findings. His reports to Earth grew longer, more detailed. He mapped the complex web of power, fear, and resentment that held the council together. More importantly, he identified the stress points where that web could break. "The council's structure is fundamentally unstable," he wrote in one report. "The major powers maintain control through force and fear, not cooperation. They compete with each other while suppressing the smaller species. Classic empire-building mistakes, repeated on a galactic scale." The turning point came during a minor trade dispute. The blue giants were demanding more resources from a mineral-rich world. Miller noticed how the crystalline beings vibrated in a pattern he'd never seen before. Anger, he realized. They depended on those same minerals. Later that day, he saw Lord Bright's silver skin ripple in a way that indicated satisfaction. Through careful observation, Miller had learned this meant a secret deal had been made. The next day, the crystalline beings voted with the blue giants on an unrelated matter. In his quarters that evening, Miller added to his report, "Confirmation of suspected voting trades. Major powers maintain facade of independence, but secretly bargain for support. Smaller species are ignored in these deals. Estimate 60% of council votes are decided before any public discussion. This system can be broken." He stood at his window, watching the capital city's lights below. Somewhere out there, Earth's diplomats were quietly making contact with trading outposts and minor colonies, laying the groundwork for what was to come. "They think they're so clever," he murmured to himself. "They don't realize that their greatest weakness is their belief in their own superiority." Miller smiled and returned to his work. The real game was about to begin. After 6 months of careful observation, Miller began his real work. His first target was the Root people, whose world was rich in rare plants but poor in technological development. He arranged a seemingly casual meeting in one of the council building's lesser-used gardens. "Your medicinal plants," Miller said quietly to the Root person representative. "We've studied them. Earth scientists believe they could be used to cure several diseases. We'd like to propose a trade." The Root person's leaves trembled. "The blue giants control all our major exports." Miller smiled. "We're not interested in major exports. Just small samples for research. The kind of trade the blue giants wouldn't even notice." This was how it began. Small deals, minor trades, nothing that would attract attention from the major powers. Earth shipped simple but useful items: water purification systems, basic shield technology, weather prediction tools. In return, they received small samples of unique materials and plants. The Council's larger species found it amusing. During one session, Lord Bright openly mocked Earth's primitive trading efforts. "Look at them, making deals for leaves and rocks," he said, his silver skin rippling with laughter. "Like children playing with toys." Miller let them laugh. They didn't notice that Earth's simple technology was carefully chosen. The water purifiers could be easily modified to process other liquids. The shield systems, while basic, could be upgraded using local materials. Each trade laid the foundation for something larger. Next, Miller approached the gas-form beings. Their control over atmospheric manipulation was unmatched, but they were treated as little more than climate regulators by the Council. "Earth has developed some interesting atmospheric processing techniques," he mentioned during a casual encounter. "Nothing as advanced as yours, of course, but perhaps you'd find our approach useful." The gas being's colors shifted to deep blue, intense interest. Earth's primitive techniques, it turned out, could be combined with their advanced technology in unexpected ways. Another quiet trade deal was made. The crystalline beings were next. Miller shared Earth's basic research on crystal formation. The crystalline beings quickly realized that these simple principles, combined with their advanced knowledge, could revolutionize their manufacturing process. More importantly, it could help them break their dependency on blue giant resources. Word spread quietly among the smaller civilizations. Earth's trades might be small, but they were fair. Their technology might be basic, but it was surprisingly adaptable. Most importantly, they asked for nothing in return except knowledge and small samples. In his regular reports to Earth, Miller documented each success. Phase 1 proceeding as planned. Small-scale trades established with 7 minor civilizations, each trade designed to increase their independence from major powers. Council remains unaware of the true implications. The major powers continued to dismiss Earth's efforts. During one session, the blue giant representative laughed at Miller's request to study their energy distribution systems. "Why waste time teaching primitives?" The blue giant rumbled. "They can barely power their own world properly." Miller accepted the rejection gracefully. What the blue giants didn't know was that Earth had already learned more about their energy systems from the smaller beings who maintained them. Knowledge traded for knowledge, creating bonds of trust and mutual benefit. Late one night, Miller sat in his quarters reviewing his progress. On his holographic display, lines of connection spread between Earth and various minor civilizations. Each line represented a trade deal, a shared secret, a quiet agreement. "The foundation is set," he wrote in his report. "Major powers remain focused on controlling resources and territory. They don't understand that true power in this galaxy flows through information and relationships. Time to begin Phase 2. He looked out at the capital's skyline, where massive ships of the major powers dwarfed the smaller vessels of minor civilizations. Soon, those same minor civilizations would begin working together, combining Earth's primitive technologies in ways the Council hadn't imagined possible. The real game was just beginning, and only Earth knew the rules. 1 year into his mission, Miller began orchestrating what appeared to be random encounters between representatives of different minor civilizations. The Council's grand reception hall became his chessboard, and the smaller species his unwitting players. "Your atmospheric processing experiments are impressive," he mentioned to a root person, while a gas form being hovered nearby. "Almost as impressive as the atmospheric control techniques I learned about last week." He walked away, leaving the two representatives to find their own way into conversation. Within days, they were discussing possible collaborations, combining the root people's biological knowledge with the gas beings' atmospheric expertise. The Council's major powers noticed nothing unusual about minor species talking among themselves. Such small alliances had never threatened their control before. But these conversations were different, each one carefully planned by Miller to create specific technological combinations. During one council session, Lord Bright was droning on about resource distribution when Miller noticed something interesting. The crystalline beings were communicating with the root people using a new form of light signaling, one that combined crystal technology with bioluminescent plants. Their cooperation had already begun. "Earth requests permission to establish a cultural exchange center," Miller announced during a minor session. The Council approved without much thought. After all, what harm could come from primitives sharing their art and music? The exchange center became the perfect cover. Representatives from minor civilizations could meet there freely, discussing cultural matters while actually sharing technological insights. Earth's primitive innovations served as building blocks, allowing different species to combine their knowledge in new ways. "These humans have interesting ideas about music," a crystalline being said to a gas form representative. What passed between them wasn't just musical theory, but new concepts about wave propagation and energy transfer. Miller's reports to Earth grew more detailed. Phase 2 proceeding beyond expectations. Minor civilizations are forming cooperative networks faster than anticipated. Each group contributes specialized knowledge, with Earth's technology serving as the connecting framework. The first real test came when the Blue Giants demanded increased resource tributes from 3 minor worlds. In the past, each world would have submitted quietly. This time, they helped each other develop alternative resources using combined technologies. The Blue Giants were forced to reduce their demands. Lord Bright noticed something was different during the next council session. "These lesser species are becoming more resistant," he said to Rex. "Perhaps we should remind them of their place." But the usual threats had lost some of their power. The minor civilizations had begun developing defensive systems, nothing that could match the major powers directly, but enough to make conquest more costly than it was worth. Miller watched it all unfold from his quiet corner. The major powers couldn't see that their very actions were driving the smaller species closer together. Every threat, every demand for resources, every display of force pushed them further into cooperation. One evening, a root person approached Miller in his office at the Cultural Center. "We understand now," it said, leaves gently swaying. "Earth's technology isn't primitive. It's designed to be connecting." Miller smiled. Every civilization develops solutions to its own problems. Sometimes the best innovations come from sharing those solutions. The root person's leaves shimmered in agreement. "The great powers think they control us through fear. They don't understand that we've stopped being afraid." Later that night, Miller added to his report, "Major powers still believe they're dealing with scattered, dependent civilizations. They haven't realized that a new network is formed, one built on cooperation rather than force. When they finally notice, it will be too late." He looked at his display, where lines of connection between minor civilizations had grown into a complex web. At the center was Earth, quietly guiding, suggesting, connecting. The major powers saw themselves as unshakable mountains, never noticing that the ground beneath them was shifting. Phase 3 would begin soon, and the real changes would start. Miller smiled as he prepared for the next day's council session, ready to play his role as the simple observer from a primitive world. The first crack in the council's power structure appeared during a routine trade dispute. The Blue Giants had demanded exclusive rights to a newly discovered energy source in the Root People sector. In the past, such demands were merely formalities. The smaller species always gave in. "We must decline," the Root Person representative announced, its leaves steady and unafraid. The council chamber erupted in shocked whispers. Lord Bright's silver skin rippled with rage. "You dare refuse? The energy source lies within our sovereign space," the Root Person continued. "We have already established processing facilities using our own technology." Miller watched from his observer's seat as confusion spread among the major powers. They didn't know that the Root People's own technology was actually a combination of Earth's energy principles and gas-being atmospheric manipulation, enhanced by crystalline focusing arrays. Lord Bright turned to Rex. "This is unacceptable. We should send ships to remind them of their place." "That would be unwise," a gas form being interrupted, its color shifting to deep red. "The Root People's atmospheric defenses are now under our protection." More shock rippled through the chamber. Minor species didn't protect each other. They weren't supposed to have the capability. Miller kept his face carefully neutral as he watched the major powers' reactions. They were finally beginning to realize that something had changed, but they didn't understand what or how. The crystalline being spoke next. "Our worlds also stand with the Root People. Our combined defensive capabilities make military action inadvisable." Rex rose from his seat, all four arms spread wide. "This is unprecedented. Since when do lesser species form military alliances?" "Not military alliances." Miller spoke for the first time, his voice calm. "Mutual cooperation agreements. There's a difference." All eyes in the chamber turned to him. For the first time, they looked at the human with something other than amusement or contempt. "What have you done?" Lord Bright demanded. "Earth has done nothing except share knowledge and encourage cooperation," Miller replied. "The species you called lesser did the rest themselves." More announcements followed. 3 mineral-rich worlds declared their independence from Blue Giant protection. 2 atmospheric processing centers announced they would now operate under joint control of multiple species. Trade routes once monopolized by major powers were open to all. The Council's carefully maintained power structure was crumbling, and they couldn't stop it. Any military action against one small civilization would now trigger responses from a dozen others. The network of cooperation Miller had helped build was revealing its true strength. "This is your doing," Rex accused Miller. "Your primitive trades, your cultural exchange center. It was all planned." Miller stood, finally dropping his mask of subservience. "Earth understood something you forgot long ago. True power doesn't come from forcing others to obey. It comes from helping them grow stronger together." The chamber erupted in chaos as more minor civilizations announced their new alliances. The major powers were finding themselves increasingly isolated. Their threats of force met with united resistance. That evening, Miller sent his most important report to Earth. Phase 3 complete. Power balance has shifted. Major species can no longer maintain control through force. New network of cooperative alliances is now self-sustaining, ready to begin final phase. He looked out at the capital city, where ships of all species now moved freely through trading lanes once restricted to major powers. The mighty council chamber seemed smaller somehow, its grandeur diminished by the realization that true power had shifted elsewhere. A message flashed on his screen. The combined fleet of Earth and its allies was ready to reveal itself. Not for war, but to ensure peace. The major powers would soon learn that their military superiority had quietly eroded while they weren't watching. Miller smiled as he prepared for the next day's council session. The galaxy was changing, and Earth was no longer the primitive newcomer they had all laughed at. It was time to show them just how far their underestimation had led them astray. The council chamber was different today. The rising tiers of seats, once arranged by power and status, had been rearranged into a circle. Miller stood at its center, no longer playing the role of the quiet observer. "For 2 years, you've called Earth primitive," he began. You laughed at our simple technology, our basic ships, our limited understanding of the galaxy. Today, that illusion ends. With a gesture, he activated the chamber's holographic display. A vast network of ships appeared, thousands of vessels combining technologies from dozens of species. Earth's primitive designs had been merged with gas-being propulsion, crystalline energy systems, and root people organic computers. Lord Bright's silver skin paled. Impossible. These ships, they're more advanced than anything we have. Because you relied on force to maintain power, Miller explained. While you were threatening and controlling, we were learning and sharing. Every species has unique insights. Combined properly, they create something greater than the sum of their parts. The display shifted, showing the new trade networks that had formed. Resources flowed freely between former minor powers, their combined economies now rivaling the major powers. The Council's control over vital supplies had evaporated. Rex stood, his massive form trembling with rage. You deceived us, played us for fools. No, Miller corrected. You fooled yourselves. You were so convinced of your superiority that you never questioned why Earth would send a single negotiator, why we accepted observer status without protest, why we seemed content with small trades and cultural exchanges. The chamber erupted in voices as the major powers realized the full extent of their failure. Their military superiority, economic control, and political dominance had been systematically dismantled while they weren't watching. Those primitive water purifiers we traded, Miller continued. They contained the basic principles of molecular restructuring, the simple shield technology, foundation work for a new type of defensive system. Every trade, every exchange was carefully chosen to help species combine their knowledge in new ways. A root person stepped forward, its leaves glowing with bioluminescent patterns. Earth showed us that we had the power all along. We just needed to work together instead of competing. The gas beings shifted their colors in agreement, forming complex patterns that the crystalline beings reflected and amplified. What once seemed like simple species were demonstrating technological mastery that left the major powers stunned. Your civilization spans galaxies, Miller said to the council leaders, but you forgot the most basic principle of growth. Diversity breeds innovation. By suppressing and controlling other species, you limited your own advancement. The holographic display showed one final image, Earth's supposedly primitive fleet emerging from hidden positions throughout the galaxy. Not to attack, but to protect the new alliance of former minor powers. So this is conquest, Lord Bright said bitterly. You've turned our own vassals against us. Miller shook his head. Not conquest. Liberation. Earth doesn't want to rule the galaxy. We want to help build something better. A civilization where all species contribute equally, where cooperation replaces control. The major powers found themselves facing a choice: adapt to the new reality or fade into isolation. Their military threats were meaningless against the combined strength of the allied species. Their economic power had dissolved as new trade networks bypassed their control. The age of empires is over, Miller announced. Welcome to the age of cooperation. In his final report to Earth that evening, Miller wrote, change accomplished without a single shot fired. Former major powers beginning to realize the benefits of true cooperation. Some still resist, but their influence wanes daily. The galaxy is transforming itself. He looked out at the capital city one last time. Ships of all species moved freely through the sky, their designs showing the beautiful complexity of combined technologies. The mighty towers of the major powers no longer dominated the skyline. Miller smiled. They had laughed at Earth's primitive ways, never understanding that true power comes not from domination, but from bringing people together. In the end, that was the most advanced technology of all. 5 years after Miller first stood in the council chamber, the galaxy had transformed beyond recognition. The new Galactic Cooperative Assembly met in a transparent dome that floated above the capital city, its architecture combining the best elements of all member species. Miller sat in a simple chair, now serving as one voice among equals. Around him, representatives from hundreds of worlds discussed trade, technology, and mutual advancement. The former major powers had finally accepted their place as partners rather than rulers. The latest combined research project has yielded results, a crystalline being announced, its facets gleaming. By merging root people biological processes with our crystal matrices and Earth's quantum theories, we've developed a new form of faster-than-light travel. This was how things worked now. No species kept technological advances to themselves. Every discovery was shared, examined, and improved upon by others. Progress accelerated at an unprecedented rate. Lord Bright, his silver skin now showing signs of age, approached Miller during a break. "I still don't understand," he said. "How did Earth know this would work? How were you so certain?" Miller smiled. "Because Earth's history taught us something valuable. Every great empire that ruled through force eventually fell. But civilizations that learned to work together, that embraced diversity and cooperation, they created golden ages." The former council leader Rex had adapted better than most. His species now specialized in diplomatic training, teaching others the art of finding common ground. "We were blind," he admitted to Miller. "We thought power came from making others weak. You showed us it comes from helping them grow strong." The galaxy's economy had transformed. Trade routes once controlled by the major powers now flowed freely. Resources were managed sustainably, with benefits shared among all. Even the smallest colonies had access to advanced technology and education. Earth's greatest victory, Miller wrote in his memorial report, wasn't in defeating the old powers. It was in showing everyone a better way to live. We didn't want subjects or servants. We wanted partners and friends. The former minor species had flourished under the new system. The root people's worlds were now centers of biological research. The gas beings had developed their atmospheric manipulation into an art form. The crystalline beings created structures that seemed to defy physics. But more importantly, they worked together. Problems that once seemed unsolvable fell before the combined wisdom of multiple species. Diseases were cured, energy crises solved, and new frontiers explored. A young diplomat from a newly spacefaring race approached Miller. "Is it true?" she asked. "Did they really laugh when Earth first came to the galaxy?" "They did," Miller nodded. "They thought we were primitive because we talked about cooperation instead of conquest. They didn't understand that Earth's greatest strength was never our technology or our resources. It was our ability to bring people together." The galaxy had learned that lesson well. The next generation grew up knowing nothing of the old power structures, the threats and domination. They saw only the endless possibilities of different species working together. Miller stood at the dome's edge, watching ships of all designs moving through the sunset sky. Each vessel represented a unique combination of technologies and ideas, a physical symbol of what cooperation could achieve. "The final joke," he mused to himself, "is that we never wanted to rule the galaxy. We just wanted to make it better." Behind him, the assembly continued its work. Representatives from former major and minor powers alike discussed new projects, shared discoveries, and planned for the future. The laughter that filled the chamber now was genuine, shared among equals. In his last official report before retirement, Miller wrote, "Earth's mission is complete. We didn't conquer the galaxy. We helped free it. The stars belong to everyone now, and the future is brighter than we ever imagined." He looked out at the endless stream of ships, each one carrying the promise of what united species could achieve. They had laughed at a lone human negotiator, never knowing that his weakness was his strength. And in the end, the galaxy learned to laugh with him.